and bid grant funding that's going to help you to carry on deliver your activities and to also expand what you do and reach more people. Okay, so today we are going to cover the whole journey towards grant funding, which starts with understanding what grant funding is, how you can find opportunities, very importantly, how you can check that the opportunities out there are the right fit for your organisation, so that you're going to get funding to deliver what you need to deliver, and also that your bids are going to be successful, how to recommend bids, and then to actually get the funding once these bids have been judged successful and some funding has been awarded. So here we've got all the kind of main sources of fundraising for the not-for-profit sector. And I've just sort of highlighted the ones that are grant funding, which is statutory and trusts and foundations. All of the other ones, so we've got corporate giving, community fundraising, giving from people, individuals and people who are major donors, who are high net worth individuals, events and crowdfunding. These are all very important sources of funding, but are easier for organisations with big name recognition and a big supporter base to go after. And they also require a lot of resources because of the organisational effort that's involved. So for newer, smaller organisations, it's often advisable to focus your efforts on grant funding. And that falls into two different categories here. We've got statutory, which is pretty much anything that comes from the government, central government or local authorities and various other agencies, and funding from trusts and foundations, which are organisations that have been set up by wealthy individuals, wealthy families, some corporates, to distribute money on behalf of those people to good causes that match their interests. And because there are sort of 8,000 of them in the UK, it's a really significant source of funding, but it can be quite difficult to figure out which ones are the right fit to your organisation. So I've just put some funders here that I think might be a good place for you to start if you're not already aware of them. The National Lottery Community Fund is a huge funder in the UK. Their main priority is to build stronger relationships in and across communities, which I think is probably a very strong fit to the type of work that you're doing. And they fund at all different kinds of levels, from very small grants under 10,000 to really bigger programmes that can be several hundreds of thousands worth of grant funding. People's Postcode Lottery is quite similar, although they tend to fund at a much smaller level. And again, their priorities are very much about strengthening communities, creating more cohesive, better integrated communities. They have slightly different setups depending on the region, but if you go to that link there, you should be able to figure out which region applies to you and find some more information about them. And I've also highlighted Garfield Weston, just an example of a trust and foundation. They only fund charities, but they do have a strong focus on supporting smaller charities across various different sectors. And they're a really strong funder in that they give the organisations that fund core costs primarily, and core costs allow you to deliver the core work of the organisation. Lots of other funders tend to focus more on project costs, which is also really important, but maybe not give you the flexibility just to fund your core running costs in the same way. And here's some ideas about how to access the many other funders that are out there and that could be useful. There are a lot of different databases out there, many of which you would need to pay for. I've highlighted some sort of a free option here for organisations with a smaller turnover. It is also available to all organisations for a small fee, and that you can find more details about that on the NCVO website. Another great source to go to is your local voluntary sector membership organisation. And I've highlighted the one in Birmingham here as an example. There will be ones for all the various different localities where you operate. So sort of just searching for those is really useful. You can sign up to them, and then that can be really helpful for meeting other organisations who are delivering work that might complement yours, which is sort of good for delivering your services, and also potentially bidding together for funding where both organisations could receive some part of that and work together to deliver a service. And then online research, quite often it can be quite useful just to have a look at websites of organisations delivering similar work to yourselves and work out who funds them, because they might be a good match for you too. Searching using keywords, that's really just as simple as putting in the type of work that you do and the location into Google, and sometimes that can generate some good options. And I've also included a link to the Charity Commission. This can be a bit overwhelming because the Charity Commission will list all the charities in the UK, including organisations who have been set up to make grants. So that will include your trusts. And you can search on that by sector and by what the organisation is set up to do. So you can filter out all the organisations that are set up to give grants to other organisations, and you'll then generate a really detailed list of organisations that might be able to fund your work. So that's the first step. That's sort of finding good funders for you. And then at this point, the research needs to get a bit more detailed. And I put here a list of things that you need to check before you go to take the next step and think about putting in an application to that funder. So open to new applications. A lot of funders are not. They will fund organisations that they already work with or that they found out themselves. So you need to check that they will accept your application before you go any further. Willing to fund your organisation type. Some trusts will fund organisations who are not for profit but are also not set up as charities, so CICs, social enterprises, other setups. Just need to check that before you proceed. And also they can sometimes specify income level, so your income level may not match what they'll fund at. Some trusts and foundations prefer to fund small organisations. Some prefer to fund older, more established organisations with higher income. The priorities match the activities you deliver. Really important, just to sort of check that what you're doing is what they want to fund. And you can have a look at some projects they funded elsewhere, which might help you to decide whether or not you're a good match in that respect. When to fund the locations you deliver. A lot of trust foundations are really local. A lot of statutory grant funders will be as well. Obviously, the local authority is only going to fund work in its area, so just need to check that that's a match too. And the funding type needed. I mentioned before that some funders will give you core costs, which will help with the everyday running costs of your organisation. Lots of others are more focused on projects where you've got a specific piece of work that you want to deliver. Some, not so many, will fund capital items, which could be buildings, computers, minibuses, anything really that's a thing rather than a service. And that cool. This is really important. I think that quite often people tend to correspond via email or digitally rather than picking up the phone. If you can pick up a phone, if it's a number provided, it can be really useful. You might be able to find out some information that isn't on their website. So you might have a specific question that someone can answer for you. It's also a great opportunity to build a connection with the funder and to give them a concise pitch for your organisation. So that when you actually submit an application, they already know about what you do. They've already had that initial information and they remember that, and that can really help to bring your project to life when you submit the application if they've already heard you describe it. And then if it's a trusted foundation, you could actually take their name and thank them in your cover letter. So quite often the application process for trusts and foundations can be a cover letter and a proposal describing what you want to do. So it's a nice touch to be able to mention the person you've spoken to as part of that. Okay, so we have covered what grant funding is, some ideas about where to find it, how to check that it's the right fit for you. So now we're going to get into some details about the process of bidding for funding. And the way in which we're looking at this is via some common bid writing mistakes, because if you know about those, then it's a lot easier to avoid them. And the first thing that I've drawn out here is proof missing. So quite often an application is really strong on describing the emotional appeal of the work, of why it's mattering to people, but it doesn't include the kind of facts, pieces of evidence that are needed to appeal to the head as well as to the heart of the reader. So that can be addressed by just finding some statistics or some qualitative evidence. So it might be some survey information from the people who use your services. It could also be quotes from the people who use your services, or from other sources of research, so that everything you say that's appealing to the heart is also backed up by some facts to appeal to the head. And then the opposite problem is that there's lots of statistics and facts and evidence, but without that emotional storytelling that needs to happen as part of the application to really bring it to life. So just to check that, as well as having your evidence, you've also got language in there that appeals to people's emotions. This is the next point. It is perhaps more relevant to organisations that have been around for some time. There's a tendency to focus on what they've done in the past, how they were set up, and all that kind of information. Whereas what the reader really wants to know is what you're delivering right now, and why should they fund that. Jargon. This tends to happen when the writer makes an assumption that whoever's reading their application is familiar with the sector they operate in, or with the background to the problem that they're addressing. It's a good idea to assume that your reader has no prior knowledge of what you do, or even of the context in which you're operating, and explain all the points that you make to make it really clear for them. And this last point is just about the dangers of cutting and pasting. You can certainly reuse text from old applications, but it all needs to be edited and tailored so that it specifically meets the requirements of the funder that you're going for in that application. The other thing around that is just to avoid using too much text from sources other than the ones that your organisation has produced. Focus very much on what you do and not on what other organisations have written. Another problem is that sometimes questions and applications can be quite long and complicated, and it's really easy just to answer part of that question and not the whole piece. So there's a few tricks you can use to try and avoid this. One thing could be break down your answers into different sections and use a heading for each, so that you're covering all the different parts of the question asked, and you're making it easy for the reader to find the different sections and to show that you've answered everything they've asked. Usually these types of applications will have word counts or page count limits that you can't go over. You want to end up with a response that is very close to that limit, so that you're taking every opportunity available to show the funder that you are meeting their needs. That usually means that you will start off with a response that's quite a bit over the limit, and then you can edit it down and make it really convincing. Temptation to answer the question that you wanted to be asked and not the actual one, or to not understand the questions and to sort of go ahead without asking for clarification. You can ask vendors for clarification if you don't understand the question, and just make sure that you're asking what they want to ask, not what you want to tell them. Just got a question in the chat. Is the amount of application related to our annual income? Some vendors may reflect that we should apply no more than 50% of annual income of organisation. The answer to that is yes. So whatever the funder guidance says, you need to follow. If it's less, it's around a percentage of your annual income, you must make sure that you're not asking for any more than that. Sometimes there'll also be rules around the amount of income more broadly. So some organisations might say you can't apply unless your income is at least 200,000 a year, or you can't apply if your income is more than 1 million a year. So just make sure that you're checking those guidance and making sure that whatever figures are in your accounts match up to the guidance. And here we've got making sure that your writing matches the funder requirements. So whatever their priorities, goals or values are, you need to show that you are demonstrating those, even if they're not asking specifically about that. It's useful to reflect their language where you can without your responses, so that it's really obvious that you're a good match for them. And also check what they'll fund. So some funders will fund services, but not salaries. There's various other exemptions that you just need to check. And then this funder terminology point. It's really usual in this type of application to have questions about your outputs, outcomes, impact, so that funders can understand what you're offering and what difference it's going to make. I've got a slide later in the presentation about that, so I won't say anything more about it just now. Responses are rambling. So this is kind of the point about getting a response that's in your word count that you've edited down, so that you're not using unnecessary words, because it takes away from the argument. And it also means that you haven't got enough words left in your limit to give them all the information that you probably want to give them. And this is some thoughts about how to avoid the mistakes. So remember them. So obviously, if you have a good knowledge of what the mistakes are, that's going to be very helpful in avoiding them, because you can just bear them in mind when you're writing and reviewing and editing your work. Working collaboratively. Lots of people don't enjoy writing bids, and a way of getting around that is to not assume that you have to be locked away in a room on your own doing the writing without any input from your colleagues. 2 or 3 people can quite easily get on a call or work in a room together and just look at an application form or a bid and think about what sort of information they should put into each of the responses, go through each one, come up with ideas, and then one person can go away and write it. And that makes the process a bit more interesting. It means you get more than one person's view on what should go into each of the sections, and generally makes for a stronger response. Also around that, it's really useful to have a few different people reviewing the bid and putting their comments and ideas on it before you actually get to the point where you're submitting it. Respond to the funder's guidance. I've said this a lot already because it's just incredibly important. Also about not just about making sure that you are meeting all their eligibility criteria, but also that you've got these responses to their values and priorities weave through your text, so that when they read it, it really resonates with them as something that they would want to fund. And then again, earlier we talked about the 2 primary mistakes are either to have too much evidence and not enough emotion, or too much emotion and not enough evidence. And the way to balance that is, I think, to look at every point you're making and to ask yourself, is it moving the reader? Is it going to generate an emotional response? But also, have I put in there a piece of evidence that justifies what I'm saying? And then being clear about the problem you're tackling and how you're going to address it. This is a really common mistake that happens a lot, where the writer is really very aware of what the problem is and also about the processes for tackling it, but the application itself isn't fully reflecting that, so that the funder doesn't immediately get the same understanding of the problem that the person writing the application has. Similarly, the way in which the services you're offering work to tackle that problem, quite often organisations are really clear in their own thinking about that, about how that works, but they don't always articulate that fully in the application. So I'm going to talk now about a tool that I would really recommend for helping you to get to that clarity about how you articulate the problem, and also how the services that you offer can help to address it. So the theory of change is a tool that was created quite a few years ago now to help charities to understand their impact and to articulate what is often called the missing middle. So charities were able to talk about the problem they want to address, and to talk about what they hope to achieve, which is the impact. But the bit in the middle could be more challenging. So the theory of change is a way in which you can work in a very logical way from the problem that you're addressing all the way through to the impact, which is how it's being solved. And it logically follows a step-by-step process. So to give you a bit of an example here, I have an imaginary project, which is a very simple idea. Quite usually with these, you'd expect a more complicated program with lots more outputs and outcomes and different activities. But to talk you through this one, we just have a very broad problem, which is something that is an issue in the UK, around young people not necessarily having the life skills that they need to successfully live as adults. And by that I mean things like knowing how to budget, how to cook for themselves, how to open bank accounts, that kind of thing. So the next stage is, once you've identified the project, is to be really clear about the audience. That's kind of the entry point. So who are you going to reach out to tackle this problem? In the case of young people, it's probably going to be schools. And then here, the activity. So for you, this will be whatever the key work of the organisation is, or if you're applying for a specific project, the activities that you're going to deliver as part of that project. For here, it's training school advisors to deliver life skills coaching, because that's the logical thing to do, and working with schools to ensure advice opportunity to deliver coaching. So the activities need to sort of consider various different elements of the problem, and also how they relate to the audience that you've chosen to help you solve that problem. And the next stage is to think, what is the immediate effect of these activities? What can you logically say is happening right away as a result of the activities that you've delivered? And quite often this will be about the skills that the people you're working with have gained, or a change in their confidence level, or in the knowledge. So it's got to be something that follows on directly from the activities delivered. And then we got outcomes, which is the next stage in the process. So if the logical benefit of your training is that the advisors gain confidence and understanding ability to deliver the training, then the next logical step would be that the young people they're supporting can improve their life skills. And this follows all the way through to the resolution of the problem here, which is that more young people improve their life skills or leave school with better life skills because of the work that you've done. Now, we're not expecting that this is going to solve the problem, because these are activities delivered to a specific number of people. The idea is to follow this process to show that you are having an impact on the problem, and that you're contributing towards solving it. To access some more information on this, I really recommend the Theory of Change Toolkit from Nesta, which you can get via the link below, which will give you a lot more guidance and advice about how to do this sort of work for your organisation, and tailor it to your activities, your programmes, the type of work that you're doing. Moving on to sort of Q&A, I think I've answered the questions in the chat so far. Can I take your questions more generally?
Yeah, we have a question here.
Yes, please.
I've got one. Thanks, Helen. That was really useful. I'm a little confused between the difference, just on that theory of change diagram. Just the difference between activities and outputs.
Yeah.
I would normally kind of merge the two, I think, and put a sort of, you know, if we did training in schools, or if we held a workshop or wrote a report, I'd normally kind of think of that as an output. I just wondered if there, perhaps I need to look on the Nesta site as well, but I just wondered that I may be guilty of the mistake in funding applications in that case of getting the terminology wrong.
Yeah.
Can you shed any more light on the difference between the two?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say activities, you're thinking about what you're delivering. So in this case, you're delivering a training, it's a thing. And from that thing that you're delivering, the next stage is that in this instance, your advisors are gaining confidence and understanding. So I think of activities in terms of 3 times 60-minute sessions, if you're looking at a very detailed view, delivered in school X. So it's sort of it's a description of what you're doing, rather than the immediate effect of the activity delivered.
But then the immediate effect isn't an outcome, because I would then think that the immediate effect will be an outcome. So
it's complicated. So the different funders also will use these terms in slightly different ways. So you need to match how you're talking about this to how the funder talks about it. So if they are writing about the outputs they want to see, which it could be that they would consider an output to be 60 sessions delivered in schools, then you would need to follow that language. Thinking about it in sort of more of a tool to help you work out how your project works, I would describe an output as the effect of the activities rather than the activities themselves.
But there's often, do you think there'll often be some hints and hints within the funding application process of what they're looking for from a?
Yeah, absolutely. And particularly for statutory funders who are asking you to deliver a specific project, they might, for example, give you a application pack that talks specifically about what they want to see delivered. And in that case, you need to reflect how they've used these words back to them. And if there's any confusion about it, again, it's also always just useful to follow whatever procedure they've got on asking for clarification, which might be hopefully a phone number so you can discuss it with them, or an opportunity to email and ask for a bit more information.
Thank you.
So Helen, thanks very much. I also got one question. You mentioned about create empathy for the people. Yeah, the importance of that. But sometimes when we are trying to do this, we start to tell stories and make the things get really long. So how do you usually do in the funding bid to create this empathy without writing the entire story or making it too long?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's difficult because obviously, but as we talked about before, you tend to have these quite strict word count limits, so you can't usually include the level of detail that you would like to really bring stories to life. So I think there's two things here. I think first of all, it's about using language that has an emotive element to it. So you might start a sentence with, I'm just trying to think of a good example. Imagine a world in which, and then whatever the point is that you're trying to make. So it's sort of an instruction to the reader to put themselves in the position of the people that you're supporting. It's a direct call for them to feel empathy, and then balance out that type of language with the more evidence-based information, so that it's not all about calling on people to feel empathy. It's also about calling on people to understand the issues and why this is a case for them to make a rational decision around giving your organisation the funding. Also, in terms of sort of bringing the stories of individuals to life, it's very useful to be able to have specific examples of real people who experience the issues and that you've helped, and to include in your application what we would call a case study of an individual is really useful. To try and address the issue of how you can do that within a really tight word count. I think it's a case of lots of editing. So a good case study would start off by giving a bit of background information about that person, what the situation is, so where they were at the beginning of when they came to your organisation. And then some information about how you help them. And that should particularly really bring out what the organisation did to provide that help. A common mistake in case studies is that it really shows the change within the individual, but not how the organisation helped to bring about that change. So a sort of a balance between how the person was able to help themselves and to change, and how the organisation gave them that support that they needed to achieve the change. So you got where they started, what happened to bring about the change, and then what the outcome was, what happened to that person as a direct result of the support that your organisation gave them. So you can actually deliver quite a lot of emotional impact by telling someone's story in possibly about 3 sentences.
So are there other questions from the floor?
Hi, I'm Asmara. I had a question, and it's more about well, actually, it's just about, I don't know if anyone in the room has done this before or has experienced it, but I know within my organization, I've just kind of started on writing bids. So I'm very new to this. And I do find it quite hard to get into that writing frame sometimes, but I know some people within my organizations and in external organizations have spoken to me about even using things like AI to support with that. Just wanted to know, in your experience, have you done anything? I haven't done it yet, because I just don't know how it would work out, but just wanted to know, has anyone done that or used the support of AI to help with the bid writing, and is it helpful? I mean, I'm not sure if I should, it's more of a personal question, but yeah, I don't know if anyone has.
That's a really interesting question. It's kind of very topical. There's been lots of chatting among bid writers about AI and its potential to help. I haven't tried using it. I do know a few people who've used specifically ChatGPT to support with bid writing. The feedback I've got is that it's perhaps not quite at the stage yet in terms of the technology to deliver what you need it to do. So for example, I think you can task it to cut your answers down into word count, which is potentially very appealing because it would save an awful lot of time to do that. But I have heard that when people have tried, because it's a robot, okay, it will tend to miss out some of the language that as a human you would want to keep.
Sorry, I just stopped the screen sharing so we can see the participants' hands.
Oh yes, okay, cool. Sorry. Yep, so just talking about what I've heard about using AI to help with the bid writing. Generally speaking, I think it's got a lot of potential, and the real appeal of it is that it would kind of free up people to work more on coming up with their creative ideas, because they'd have to spend less time on the more potentially tedious bits of editing text down. Also, just generally on terms of making bid writing a more enjoyable experience, I just go back to the point around collaborating with colleagues so that it's sort of a more fun way of spending your time. And it works really well to have a couple of people to working on sections together and just bouncing ideas off each other. When I've done that, you can actually accomplish as much working as a team as you can working on your own to get sections done. And it is helpful to look at questions together and get other people's views on what the funder is really trying to get at by asking a specific question, rather than going off on your own, really sort of trying to understand something without having the advantage of bouncing your ideas off the people that you work with. But has anyone else tried using AI? Be interesting to hear.
Yeah, I tried to. Because sometimes we will prepare similar materials for different funding, as you know, and different funding would have different word limitation in each questions. So I think one of the use of the AI language is that we can ask the AI to help us to cut off sometime from our paragraph, maybe 1,000 words to be 400 words. And of course, it is heartbreaking if we need to do it by myself, but it would be great if the AI can help. Then I think for this session, it is quite good. And the other use of AI is that if you are a new build organization, it will be good to train your AI to insert some of your repetition or your past history, and they will be good to help you to organize some introduction of your organization or something like that. It is temporarily what we try to do, but it is quite good, I think.
Okay, great. Do you have any more questions?
Can I ask another one? Sorry, this is Mara again. Do you have any kind of guides or, like I said, I'm very new into just starting to start writing bids. Anything that helped you to begin with? Any kind of guides or websites that you think were really good at helping with it? Because yeah, I do get stuck a lot, and a lot of the bid writing is quite independent. It's not really working with the team. Everyone else are writing on other bids. So
okay. Yes, so if you look at the NCVO website, which I talked about earlier as having a database for finding funders, there's some resources on that would probably be worth a look at. You can also have a look at the Institute of Fundraising website. They have a section of resources specifically for smaller charities and CICs to take a look at. More generally, it's really useful just to talk to someone who has more experience and trying to sort of bounce your ideas off them. So if you've got someone else that you work with that has that and is able to give you just a little bit of time to look at your work and give you some suggestions, I think that'd be really useful. Alternatively, if perhaps you've got some organisations who are all working together on bids, what can be helpful is, particularly if you're sort of working in the same sector, is to set up into support groups. So you could have a chat channel or regular sessions to sort of catch up about what bids you're working on, how they're going, what issues you're finding, and just asking the group for some advice that might be helpful. In general, I'd say, because it's necessarily requires a lot of time where it's just you and the screen, anything you can do to talk to other people, make it more collaborative is really useful.
I've got another question. I'm finding this really useful. The real eye-opener for me is that funding bids need to be more of a sales pitch. I think certainly ones I've written have been quite dry, and I've seen them slightly more in almost as a more academic exercise, and maybe have lost sight of the fact that actually this is being read by another human being, and your job is to persuade them that they should get their checkbook out because you were a good cause, isn't it really? So there's getting that balance between emotion and I feel I probably need to dial up some of the emotion in some of the bids I've written. But that isn't the question, obviously. The question was, when you're an organisation that maybe is a bit less frontline, for example, something like the Welcoming Committee for Hong Kongers, which is an umbrella organisation supporting other organisations, any tips at all for how you make that, when some of your impacts and outcomes are somewhat more intangible and less impact directly on individuals?
Yeah.
Any thoughts on how you deal with that at all?
Absolutely. So you can certainly do a theory of change for an umbrella organisation or anyone that's supporting other organisations to help individuals rather than providing direct support to those individuals. It's kind of about going through it stage by stage. So if you think about in the theory of change, the audience for an umbrella organisation, the audience would be the organisations who are directly supporting individuals. So the change the stages that you want to see would be about how those organisations change. So it could be your activities are, for example, training organisations or providing coaching sessions. And then the output would be that those organisations gain understanding and confidence of how they can capacity build or deliver services. So you're still getting towards the same resolution of the bigger societal problem that you've identified, but you're just breaking it down into more detailed approach and thinking about what you're doing to support or change those organisations that's going to give them what they need to achieve the outcomes working directly with individuals.
Yeah, that makes really good sense.
And just on that, I think thinking about sort of organisations that work with lots of others and about how you can apply for funding, any way in which you can sort of work with the organisations you support to get the evidence that you need for your bids would be good. Again, something like sort of having a chat channel so that you can sort of reach out and say, we're applying for this funding and we need our members to help by sharing evidence or examples of success can be really useful. Who's got a question in the chat?
We've got one question in the chat.
The distinction between outputs and outcomes. Yeah, this is really confusing. So I think it's useful to think about it as a linear process. So we've got activities. Output is kind of the immediate consequence of your activities, and the outcome is what happens as a consequence of that further down the line. And I realise this is quite confusing, and it's going to be really different for each organisation and for each different type of activities that you deliver. I would really recommend going to the Vanessa Toolkit for some more guidance about how you can think about these specifically for your own services. And just a point about using AI, yeah, I can see how it's a worry because of the fear that writing that comes from artificial intelligence can't match the story that comes from a person. Funders do not like applications being written by professional funding application consultants. Some funders do and some funders don't. It's definitely a good idea to be able to write your own bids where that's possible. Lots of organisations do bring in professionals to help with that, depending on sort of the size and scale of the bid that they might be looking into.
So are there any other questions on the floor? Yeah. So if no, then we'll end a bit earlier. So thank you, Helen, for your valuable sharing. We'll share the recording of this session later, so you can have a look at what Helen has said, and especially the common mistakes, so you can remember it and don't have it again in your future bid reading. So good. Also, Helen, can you share the slides to our participants after this webinar as well?
Yes, of course.
Yes. So yeah, we can share the slides with you as well. So thank you everyone for coming, and yeah, good luck for your future fund bidding. Thank you. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you.
Thank you.